Overpaying for anything sucks, especially socks, so why pay $45 for a single pair of grip socks when you can spend less than half? Pure Grip Socks Pro feature our best materials for optimal fit, moisture wicking, and performance at a fair price, just $16.99 a pair at puregripsocks.com.
New for 2022, but perhaps more importantly, the replacement for what I would argue is the greatest laceless football boot ever made in the X Speedflow Plus. Ladies and gentlemen, the Adidas X Speedportal Plus, their latest and greatest in laceless speed boot technology, featuring a Speedskin 2.0 upper, a Speedframe 2.0 sole plate, new Carbitex tooling, stability wings, and a brand new laceless system, bearing a retail price of $280, which is $5 up from last year, making this technically now the most expensive speed boot from the big three brands. Which of course begs the question, are they actually worth it? Not just in comparison to the other new speed boots of 2022, but in comparison to last year's Speedflow Plus. Have Adidas actually improved, or have they taken a step backwards? We're gonna go over all the details and talk about what's different with this new Speedportal Plus, including how they fit and feel on feet. So if you're interested in learning more, please stick around, watch the entire review. And if you are interested in a pair for yourself, even though they just came out, you don't have to pay the full retail price. If you check out the first link down below, that's going to take you to the review page on my website, where you'll find buy it now links with exclusive SR4U coupon codes, where you'll be able to pick these up below their normal $280 retail price. Don't forget to like the video if you find it helpful, and if you aren't subscribed to the channel already, make sure you hit that subscribe button along with the little bell notification so you don't miss out on my reviews of all the latest football boots of 2022. Starting off with the upper, as you can see pretty clearly, it's still a knit-based synthetic material. Speedskin 2.0 is what Adidas is calling it, and if you're familiar with the Speedflow Plus that it replaces, it's kind of a similar idea. It even has the singular strip down the middle, and then on either side, the material gets a little bit more technical, especially here on the medial side, where you can see there's significant texturing and just changes in the pattern itself. Even the liner is fully translucent, where you can actually see some of the reinforcement within the knitted pattern itself. If I'm comparing this to last year's Speedflow Plus, honestly, it kind of feels like a variation of the same thing. It's thin, it's soft, it's pliable, it feels very sock-like on feet, and it trends towards being more sock-like rather than raw, plasticky synthetic, which, if we compare this to the Speedportal 0.1, for those of you that saw my review on those boots, even though that's also listed as Speedskin 2.0, that's a material that feels thicker, that feels more structured, that feels a little bit more rigid and plasticky, has a completely different lining material, and again, despite having the same name, is a very different synthetic. So unlike last year, where the X Speedflow Plus and Speedflow 0.1 both offered really good synthetic materials that were just a little bit different, this year I definitely think there's a clear winner in the Speedportal Plus over the Speedportal 0.1 in terms of the feel of the upper. However, the trade-off is, of course, if you do go for the Speedportal Plus, you are going to be stuck with a laceless system, which in comparison to last year is very different in that it's no longer reinforced by a thin layer of polyurethane. This is still a stretchy prime knit material like you find on the Speedportal Plus, but they've left it completely exposed, as we've seen on many other Adidas laceless products. The issue that I have with what they've done here on the Speedportal Plus is that it just doesn't feel secure enough. It's a little bit difficult for me to show you, but if you look at the underside of this laceless section, it's basically just thin prime knit that has an elasticated feel to it, meaning that it stretches really easily because of how thin it is. There's nothing that's really stopping your foot from stretching the top of this football boot, and with every step that you take, certainly a quick change of direction, pair that up with what they've done in the heel, which we'll get to in just a second, and you end up with a speed boot that doesn't necessarily feel sloppy on your feet, but it's definitely lacking in tightness. And if we are comparing it to last year's Speedflow Plus, I think what made me so impressed with that football boot is I was kind of the opinion that a laceless design doesn't make sense for something in the speed boot category, where you want it to fit as tight as possible and feel as responsive as possible. You want them to be secure, and I think the Speedflow Plus, given that they fit your foot properly, offered that better than any other laceless football boot we had ever seen with this fully exposed prime knit material, while the boots are certainly much easier to put on and take off, and I would even argue feel more comfortable on your feet, the lockdown responsiveness and objective performance characteristics that you pay big money for in the high-end speed boot category are a major step back with the Speedportal Plus. It's not that they feel bad, because like I said, I think these are remarkably comfortable, especially for laceless football boots, but they just don't feel tight. So unless you're looking for that loose feel from a pair of high-end speed boots, the Speedportal Plus might not be for you. One more note regarding the upper is they have added these little kind of spiky micro-textured elements on the surface. There's a little bit here on the lateral side. You'll find more of them here on the medial side. Kind of difficult to see, but you definitely feel them when you run your finger along the upper. Doesn't really make for any noticeable difference in terms of extra grip or feel when making contact with the ball. So it's one of those elements that I wouldn't say is very important or impactful to the overall experience. And then something else I really kind of don't like, but at the same time don't really mind with the Speedportal Plus are these kind of angular ridges they've added on either side of the laceless system. You don't find it on the Speedportal 0.1, but on the Plus model, they've added them in. It doesn't really add any structure. It's just kind of like a crease in the upper that's permanent, and I don't think it feels great to the touch, but again, on the ball, I couldn't tell they were there, so no major complaints, just kind of a weird design element that makes the upper look maybe a little bit more sculpted than it perhaps needs to. Moving to the rear, just like the Speedflow they replace, it does maintain a low-cut design. They've eliminated the extension piece on the front and even the tail on the back, which I personally like the look of, but this is probably for the betterment of the overall design. And like I pointed out with the Speedportal 0.1, from the top-down view, you can definitely see how much bulk there is to the heel area of the football boot. It is arguably the widest point in the overall silhouette, and you can definitely feel that with the boots on feet in what is a visible amount of tons of padding running through the heel liner, where historically the X series has had kind of like a pillow-like heel liner material, but two individual pillows. This time around, they kind of just stuffed it with as much padding as possible, and just like the Speedflow Plus and a lot of the other laceless models that came before it, it does maintain this kind of like reverse Velcro texturing to the liner material, and they added these little rubber streaks kind of all along that material to further enhance the grip, although I do find it a little bit funny that they also put the size tag right there covering a bunch of the grips and kind of eliminating how much grip that heel liner is actually going to have on your heel in a pretty critical area on a pair of laceless boots. So it's always funny to me when brands do that type of thing. Nonetheless, I definitely think that there is some additional grip because of the heel lining material that they've used on your heel when you slide your feet inside of the boots. However, because there is so much padding, it just has room to compress. So when you pair that up with the lack of lockdown that you get from this very stretchy laceless system directly across the top of your foot, heel slippage and general heel movement, not just up and down, but even from side to side from that foam compressing, is something that I found to be pretty noticeable with these boots. Not to the point where it was uncomfortable or to the point where I had any issues with blisters whatsoever. I actually think these are very comfortable football boots. They just don't feel particularly secure, which for my liking personally, especially when it comes to something that falls into the speed category at basically one of the highest price points you can get, I just expect more from a pair of speed boots, and I definitely think, again, it's a step back from a lockdown perspective versus what we had from the Speedflow Plus. And just because I always show you, even though it's not the most exciting thing, the insole, fully removable, features this really soft material on the surface, some perforations through the heel and midfoot area, and it's made from a single layer of white foam. Pretty much the same insole we're used to getting on just about every high-end Adidas boot. Which brings us to the carbon stability wing, something that Adidas really pushed in their marketing material, where you can see it's directly attached to the sole plate, but instead of being a solid heel counter, it's now kind of broken up into these individual wings with some visible carbon fiber-like material. Whether or not it's actually carbon fiber, we don't really know, kind of outlining this plastic wing, which really I would argue is where all the stiffness is coming from in terms of what you can feel. What I will say, and what I don't love about this design, is it's kind of just a double heel counter, because instead of just leaving these carbon wings as a standalone element for stiffness, there's actually an internal heel counter that it's pressed directly on top of. So how much is this actually helping in the grand scheme of things? I would argue it's not helping at all. It's just there for the sake of cosmetics. I definitely think that it looks cool from a distance. Up close, I think it's on the bulkier side, but it's one of those elements that just take it with a grain of salt, because I don't think it's enhancing performance in any way at all. And once again, just like I pointed out on the Speedportal 0.1, the double Adidas logo there, I just think looks a little strange. Which brings us to the base of the football boots, featuring the new Speedframe 2.0 Soleplate and stud pattern tooling, along with the new Carbitex carbon fiber plate. And here's the thing about the Carbitex plate, and again, I pointed this out in my Speedportal 0.1 video. If you remove the insole and look inside the boot, you can definitely see that the carbon fiber shank, while it's listed in the tech specs as being a full-length carbon fiber plate, clearly it's not. It ends basically just before the heel, and the part that is there in the midfoot is super minimal. It's basically just enough so you can see it peeking through the cutouts in the sole plate itself, which is predominantly made from plastic. And if you compare it to the Speedflow Plus that it replaces, remove the insole and look inside, this new carbon plate is basically this much longer, and it's effectively just that skinny tail that they've now left exposed. So as far as what the difference is in terms of this carbon plate versus the old one, it is extremely minimal, and I think most of the changes made were mostly for the sake of just looking cooler and looking like there's that much more carbon. As for the feel and performance of the new Speedframe 2.0 sole plate, I have to admit, in particular with the Speedportal Plus variation, I was a little bit disappointed in that because the lockdown from the upper is a little bit lacking, it's hard to feel the true energy return from the sole plate, because what you feel more than anything is your foot pushing against the top of the upper and kind of having it stretch on your feet while you're moving around. In order to really feel the responsiveness of this fling back effect underneath your feet, you definitely need the boots to feel very secure and tight on your feet. And unfortunately, you just don't get that with this laceless design, but you did get it with the outgoing Speedflow Plus. Like I mentioned in my Speedportal 0.1 review, I really don't think there's a major difference in feel. It still has that spring back effect, but maybe it's down to the plastic tooling this time around and that there are just more cutouts. It does feel that little bit less stiff and that little bit more flexible, which I would argue kind of feels borderline normal compared to what we had on Speedflow and even on X Ghosted when the Carbitex insert was first introduced. It's not that this feels bad, it still feels very, very good. But again, if we're comparing the sole plate as a package in combination with everything else, I just don't think this feels as special as what we had before. And as for the new FG stud pattern, it's pretty well the same general layout. The major difference that you're going to find is the addition of this stud right here, kind of in line with the two front studs. You even have a little toe pick chevron stud as well. The studs themselves are still kind of bladed in shape, but maybe a little bit less aggressive this time around. But as far as overall traction is concerned when compared to the Speedflow, because of that additional stud at the front, when pushing off in a straight line, there's maybe that little bit of extra bite, but otherwise it's very, very similar. And if you liked what you had with the previous generation of X, you're still gonna like what they're doing now. Which brings us to the weight. Is the new Speedportal Plus lighter than the Speedflow Plus that it replaces? Well, we're gonna find out in real time using a scale, both in the same size, 9.5 US. We'll start off with the now outgoing Speedflow Plus, 6.7 ounces, the equivalent of 190 grams. Remember those numbers. We'll change the scale back to ounces and we'll throw on the Speedportal Plus, and you can see that they weigh in at 6.9 ounces, the equivalent of 195 grams. So from a weight perspective, the new model is 5 grams heavier than the model it replaces, which isn't really a big deal. You're not going to notice that amount of weight on your feet, but for the sake of improving every year, like the brands would lead you to believe, they have technically gotten heavier. On feet, the Speedportal Plus feels really good, although the try-on feel can be a little bit deceptive when compared to actually playing in the boots. From a try-on perspective, they're super comfortable. You slide them on and they're almost like a pair of slippers. They're so much easier to put on because of the stretch through the laceless system that you get on these versus the Speedflow Plus they replaced. The sole plate feels a little bit more flexible. They've increased the width and volume through the toe box and forefoot slightly, which just makes them feel less tight on your feet. And the amount of padding through the heel liner feels really good when you're just sitting down or just standing up. When you start moving around, however, you can definitely feel the movement in the heel from the compression in that padding, and you can definitely feel the movement with slippage in your heel and slippage through the midfoot, because every time you bend your foot, that laceless system that's just thin prime knit material stretches and relieves all the tension that you have across the top of your foot, which is effectively what holds your foot in place inside of the football boot. So from a lockdown and responsiveness perspective, they feel borderline loose. Not necessarily sloppy, because you can see they wrap your foot quite nicely, even with a little bit of additional width, but when you make those hard cuts and those changes of direction, even when striking the ball, the boots are simply not as tight as I would like them to feel. And when I say it like that, it almost sounds like a personal preference thing, but it's really not, because when you talk about objective lockdown characteristics, these are simply just lacking in comparison to every other speed boot alternative, including Adidas's own Speedportal 0.1. If you want a more locked in and secure sensation from an Adidas boot, that new Speedportal 0.1 is definitely the way to go. If you like a looser feel to your football boots, then I suppose these are the ones for you, but I don't think many people spending nearly $300 on a pair of speed boots are looking for them to feel loose on their feet. As far as width is concerned, these definitely have more width compared to the previous generation, especially with the extra stretch across the top of the foot from that elasticated prime knit and the extra width through the forefoot and toe box area. As long as you don't have exceptionally wide feet, these will fit on most people's feet. How well they'll fit you, however, because of the lack of adjustability with the laceless system, is totally down to your feet specifically, and it really is a matter of trying them on, but most people should be able to get them on. And as far as sizing is concerned, I'm wearing these in my usual size 9.5 US, and the fit and the length is a smidge longer than what it was on the Speedflow. I have just a little bit of extra room. I wouldn't even say a quarter size, less than that, but it's certainly not enough to justify going down in size. For me, true to size is still the way to go, and unless you had a little bit of extra space previously in the Speedflow, going true to size is personally what I would recommend for the new Speedportal. So in conclusion, if you've watched the entire review up until this point, you're probably expecting me to say that these are terrible and you shouldn't buy them, but that's not entirely my opinion. What I like about the Speedportal Plus is that it's very noticeably a pair of laceless football boots that feel like a pair of socks on your feet. That, I think, is the experience that people are looking for when they buy a product like that, and in that regard, I think this is a great pair of football boots. Unfortunately, the comfort and sock-like feel that these have on offer isn't enough to justify picking these over other speed boot options, including Adidas's own and less expensive Speedportal 0.1, and that I just feel that it's lacking in all the other objective performance characteristics that you would want in a pair of high-end speed boots, predominantly lockdown and overall responsiveness. If I were just going for a fun kickabout with some buddies and really wasn't planning on doing much in the way of running or sprinting, these are the boots that I would pick. But in a match where I know I'm gonna be sprinting, I know I'm gonna be making hard cuts, and I want the most from my football boots, certainly something from the speed category, this would not be at the top of my list. In other words, I like the way that they feel, but I think they sacrifice too much in terms of objective performance characteristics to justify the price tag and to justify picking these over other speed boot options.